Welcome back to another episode of KKC Consulting. With me today, I have Curtis VanWalleghem. He's raised almost $1 billion for his company, Hydrostor. The company is absolutely fantastic, and we have an even more fantastic founder with us today, so we're in for a treat. Please stay tuned in for the entire episode. Now, Curtis, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, really happy to be here, Mark.
This is awesome. As soon as I got your email that you'd be willing to come on, I was so happy. You actually don't understand. I told my baby brother straight away.
That's good. No, it's always, I enjoy listening to podcasts, and I've learned a lot over the years. So I'm always up to share a bit of my story, hoping that it resonates with some people that are listening.
What podcast do you listen to?
Just a range of them. There's one, Hardware to Save a Planet, where people doing big hard tech things, but typically just investors or friends of mine will just send me random links, and then I just listen to them.
That's awesome. Now, before we begin, do you mind giving a little synopsis about yourself?
Yeah. So Curtis VanWalleghem, I'm 47, grew up in Northern Ontario, about 6 hours north of Thunder Bay, a town called Kenora. Got recruited to do varsity hockey. So I have two brothers and a family up there. Got recruited to do varsity hockey and engineering for the University of Toronto. So when I was 18, I moved down here. I'd never been to a big city before. In third year, I got accepted to a joint engineering MBA program.
I see.
So you got 3 years work experience, engineering degree, and an MBA. I went through that program. Went overseas to India, volunteered for a bit after I graduated, and then I started in management consulting with Deloitte. Did that for about 10 years, worked all around the world, Korea, Middle East, Europe, all across the US, just on big projects that were going sideways that we had to turn around. Then I joined Bruce Power, a big nuclear and wind generator, was the head of planning there. And then that's when I met a guy and we had the idea for Hydrostor. And so in 2010, I started Hydrostor, two guys in an attic, and 15 years now, as you mentioned earlier, raised a lot of money, and we're building stuff in Australia, across North America, and a bit of Europe. I've got a wife and a 9-year-old boy now and live in Toronto. So that's it at the highest level.
That's amazing. I do want to say you do not look 47. You look like you just hit 30. Yeah, but so many things you touched on. So many things. Before we go even further though, are there any questions you think that I should be asking you just to get to know you a bit better?
Oh, that's a tricky one. No, I don't think so. I mean, for me, I'm kind of a simple small town guy at the end of the day. And so I don't have fancy cars. I don't have exotic tastes. I just, beer, bonfires, barbecue, sports, news. That's kind of what I grew up with, and still to this day, kind of that's my roots. So a pretty simple guy when it all comes down to it, and just really wanted to have an impact on the world. I was really worried about climate change. So that's kind of what led me to start Hydrostor, but also to stick with it when times got tough, and kind of really push through. So I think that's kind of me in a nutshell. It's just kind of a simple, down to earth guy that tried to have an impact and got a bit lucky and was persistent enough to kind of keep things moving. And so Hydrostor's, grown quite a bit. We're by no means out of the woods and a success story or anything. We've still got a ways to go, but feeling really good with where we're at, and love working there every day.
That's awesome. Before we jump into Hydrostor, because I'm super interested about that, can you talk to me about what you learned from, Bruce Power, Deloitte, all these big companies? What did you learn?
I did my MBA really young. I had only had a couple of internships. And so I was 23 years old, 22, and I'm in with like 30-year-olds, mid-30 people that had careers. And so when I graduated, what Deloitte really offered me was a chance to get a broad amount of work experience. So we would, be moving some from New York to Colorado, a business, firing everyone, learning their systems, rehiring people, and instituting it there. you do that for 6 months and then you're done. Now you go to Korea and a manufacturer's failing. So you got to help turn around that business. Then you go to the Middle East and you work with an oil and gas company that's facing a bunch of challenges. And so you would just move every 6 months to a different part of the world in a different industry, solving a very complex problem. So the hours were pretty intense. The travel was intense, but in terms of me getting a lot of work experience crammed into a short amount of years
Right.
was really beneficial. And I kind of needed it because I did that MBA so early. It was a great way to really expose myself to a lot of different experiences, and like it helped me grow as a professional, as a person, and made me a lot more varied in my experiences. So when I started Hydrostor, I'd never raised money before, but I'd been in so many uncomfortable situations
Right.
and taught myself as I went. I had the confidence that I could figure this out too. And I kind of joke that at Hydrostor, I'd never been at a board meeting. Now I'm starting a company and starting a board. I never raised money, and then you're raising money. And then I never raised private equity money, and then project debt. And so I'd never run a big team before. Maybe 10 people was the most I ever had reporting to me. Now we're hundreds of people. So I was just learning around every corner, and consulting really helped steer me towards that. And then Bruce Power was great because I knew I wanted to work in the power sector. And it was a chance to work for a very big company and really learn how the industry operated. So that was a great experience as well, and ultimately allowed me to learn enough about how the industry works to spot that when you have intermittent wind and solar, you're going to need some sort of storage to firm it up. Otherwise, it'll cause you issues. And that's what ultimately led to the idea for Hydrostor and starting that business.
Right. There's something interesting that you touched on that I want to talk about. And it's the idea that sometimes you might not know exactly where you want to go into. You might not know how to raise $600 million or whatever the amount might be, right? But it's really impressive when you have someone who has passion for something. They fight through all the challenges because entrepreneurship's by far the hardest thing you'll ever do, right? And I don't know, I commend you for it. I really do because it's a long process.
Yeah, it is. But life, you only live once. You got to do something with your life and have an impact. And you either succeed or you learn something.
Right.
And so I've always been one that pushes myself to do more, sign up for things, and just go do it. Just throw yourself out there and do it. Ask people for help if you need help. But I've never been one that's been afraid to try something new. And so, and that's where I find I learn the most. I have the best experiences. I'm proud of myself afterwards. So I just encourage people, just take on new things, sign up for it, just go out there and do it. Make the most of your life. Because as you get older, you start looking back, and I think it's the things that you didn't do that you're going to regret more than doing something and coming up a bit short or whatnot.
There's so much I could talk about in that, but just me personally, I'm very, very obsessed over the idea of wasted potential, right? And I feel we've been given so many opportunities. Like, number one, I've got all my limbs, I've got my eyes, I've got everything, right? Number two, we're not in a war-torn country, pretty blessed in that aspect. And then number three, I'm a pretty good-looking guy. We
Yeah.
could, but apart from that joke, we honestly have so many things going for us that honestly, like, there's so much we can do. The sky's the limit, and you're a perfect example, right? Like growing up almost on the countryside, coming to Toronto, adjusting to all of that, then going into Deloitte and being consulting around for so many years. And I really feel that, like you mentioned, at the end of the day, when you're old, the only things you're gonna regret are the things you didn't do, not the things that you might have done, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely true. It's the only thing limiting you is your imagination and your ability to get yourself out of bed and put yourself out there a little bit. Just like when you didn't want to, you're dating a girl in high school, you didn't want to ask her to dance. You just got to go and ask, and the worst she could do is say no. So
Fair.
just put yourself out there, and it's amazing. You do that consistently, And 5, 10 years later, you look back and you've accomplished so
So
much and
much.
you've done so much compared to other people that are just afraid to put themselves out there. They're afraid of failing, so they don't try. And you really notice it compounding, just like investing, like compounding interest.
Mhm.
Um, if you keep doing that and you keep putting yourself out there, it builds and experiences multiply. And next thing you know, they're self-reinforcing. And you look back 10 or 15 years later and you're like, wow, I can't believe how much I've accomplished and come this far.
Mhm.
But it's just in that continuous learning mindset and putting yourself out there and not wasting your potential.
Mhm. There's a guy I want to bring up. His name's you probably are familiar with him, David Goggins, right?
I don't think I know it.
Oh, I see. I'll tell you a
Yeah.
story right now.
Okay.
So he was 300 pounds. He went into the Navy SEALs, but then he was too scared of the water. Gained all the weight, became 300 pounds, as I mentioned, and had a job at a place called Ecolab where he sprayed cockroaches for $1,000 a month. So he was in one of the most racist cities of America at the time. Grew up single mom household. And what's really interesting is one day he saw a documentary of Navy SEALs carrying logs and bolts, and he decided to kind of make a change. He went to the recruiter's office for the Navy SEALs, and I mean, keeping in mind he's black, he's 300 pounds. The recruiter said straight to his face, "You're black and you're 300 pounds. There's only been, I think, 6 of you who have ever joined the Navy SEALs," right? And rather than that putting him down, he went back, lost, I think, 150 pounds in 3 months.
Hmm.
That's intense.
Yeah. Okay.
He did all of that, and now he holds he holds the highest record, the world record for the most pull-ups done in one time. And on top of that, he's ran hundreds of miles at one time. He did an Ironman. He's done all these crazy things. And just a few days ago, I ran 15 miles. I couldn't feel my legs afterwards. And when you look at all these people, you think, how is that even possible? Like how could you go from 300 pounds with, you know, nowhere near the opportunities that I've got and just become the man you are today?
Yeah. It's amazing stories, the human potential.
Hmm. And just tying that back in, I feel, going back to the whole waste of potential idea, if you keep applying yourself, atomic habits, you're probably familiar with that as well. If you just compound, like your growth, if you just consistently show up every single day, your growth is going to compound. When I started this podcast, if I'm being very honest with you, I expected 2 of my friends to see it, 5 of them to say it's garbage without seeing it, and then maybe 10 others to say, "Oh, I saw you did the podcast. That's great." And then now, like, it's 5,000 views and it's starting to get somewhere, which I'm super glad about. I've got people like you coming on.
There you go.
Makes
You're
my
off
day.
to a great start.
Thank you so much. And then, yeah, I guess a little bit of a self reflection on my end, but yeah, thank you for reminding me. And moving on, let's talk about Hydrostor, right? There's so much to talk about, but from your own lens, can you talk to me about the journey with that?
Whew, where to start? Yeah, so what Hydrostor does is we, it kind of sounds crazy now, but you essentially sink a shaft about 15 feet diameter, and you go 600 meters underground. Then you lower workers down, and they mine out what's probably the size of a football field, maybe about 30 or 40 feet high,
Wow.
and then you flood it with water. And then you buy compressors that move natural gas down the natural gas pipelines. But we just grab air, pressurize it, send it down into the cavern. And as the air fills, it lifts the water up.
Oh,
And then a valve holds it in. And that acts like a giant battery for wind and solar. When the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining, we can then produce power. And when
I
there's lots
see.
of solar, we use it to run the compressor to push air down.
Right.
And so it's just a much cheaper battery than lithium ion batteries. And it lasts like 100 years. It never degrades. It's only air, rock, and water. And it's all domestically supplied. You don't need rare earths or import. If you go to India, you can build one there using all Indian parts. And you go to Australia, same thing. And
Wow.
so it's a way for local jurisdictions to build a lot of energy storage that allows them to essentially rely on wind and solar for their electricity grid. And even if it's nighttime and it's not windy, you still can produce power, essentially the bottled up wind and solar power from the day earlier. So that's kind of was the concept. And then getting these projects is pretty challenging. You've got to buy land. You've got to find a place to plug into the grid. You've got to get all the permits. Then you got to secure a revenue contract from the utility. And then you got to go to the banks and get a bunch of debt. And then you got to hire the construction companies to build it. And then you operate it. And so a typical plant is about $1 billion to $1.5 billion. And so we had to raise a bit of money, build a pilot plant, show it would work, raise a bit more money, get some grants. Then we had to build out our team, figure out where could we get contracts. Turns out Australia and California. So now we're flying all around the world. We convince the utilities that the technology makes sense. They give us contracts, raise some more money. And so it's been 15 years of kind of putting all the building blocks, patenting the solution.
Yeah.
And so now we're a few hundred people. We're building a couple of plants. We've got about 15 that are in earlier stages where we're getting the permits. And wind and solar is really taken off. So the need for storage is so much more. So everything seems to be lining up really well where we can deploy this technology all around the world, helping to integrate wind and solar and have an impact on climate change, make a bunch of money, give a bunch of jobs.
Help the economy.
Yeah. So overall, that's kind of the journey at Hydrostor so far, first 15 years anyway.
Where did your passion for it come, climate change?
I was reading a lot about climate change, and it's just so obvious that if you think it's 100 million barrels of oil a day we burn, and it's like the atmosphere is only whatever 10 kilometers high. It's like imagine sitting in your garage and burning a barrel of oil and keeping the garage door closed. Like that's just the earth. There's no way we can keep doing this. And the storms getting worse, the forest fires, everything else. And my niece was born, Shay. And I remember thinking to myself, I was working in the Middle East for an oil and gas company. And I was like, when my niece Shay grows up and the world's burning, she's going to be like, well, what were you doing to try to stop this? And I'm like, I'm helping the oil and gas companies figure out how to burn more of the stuff. And it was like, I got to try to do something. And I realized my grandfather was in World War II and how proud I was of him about learning, when they defeated the Nazis and the parties they threw when they came back home and all the buddies from the war helped each other build homes. And I'm like, that's kind of like the legacy I want to live is be proud, be on the right side and give my kids and grandkids something to look up to. So that's when I said, you know what? Here's an opportunity. I see it. The fundamentals to me, the world can't keep burning oil and gas. You've got to electrify. Wind and solar are clearly the cheapest, but they need to be firmed up with storage. And so I said, look, there's no way wind and solar don't win in the end. Mm-hmm. And that means they need storage. It's a great opportunity to get in early and wanted to make my niece proud. And so, just took the plunge and quit my job, put my life savings into Hydrostor. And even though I'd never raised money, never was a CEO, decided to take the plunge. I think it was 3 years before I drew my first salary from the company.
Really?
I got all my friends and relatives to put money in. And so you can imagine you go home for Thanksgiving and everyone's like, how's my money doing in the company? And the times when you thought the company was going to go under, you're just thinking about, wow, I'm going to have to call all those people and tell them I lost all the money. And it was a bit of a bold bet, a bit of a bold step to take. But like I said, really glad I did now. But I have said I was naive, but if I would have known what I know now and how hard it was and how lucky we needed to get, I probably wouldn't have done it in the first place. And I think that's true for a lot of entrepreneurs. It really is. It's hard. There are very dark times, but ultimately, when you make it through, it's obviously worthwhile. But many companies don't make it through, so you also appreciate. You'd have to know when to quit. For me, whenever I thought about quitting, I kind of went back to first principles, and I was like, why am I quitting? Is it because the technology doesn't work? Is it because my thesis on where the world's energy systems are going is wrong? Or is it just I'm going through a hard period, but no one can tell me why this won't work. They're just saying, well, I'm not the right investor for you, or I can't give you this contract now. So that just means you got to try harder and you got to talk to more people. And I, every time I was having those tough thoughts, it was, there's nothing fundamental about what we're trying to do that people are saying is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It's just we haven't found the right investor or found the right partner. So we just keep looking, and sure enough, we would then find them. So kept going.
We're going to talk a bit more about the challenges later on, but before that, I feel every entrepreneur is built in with a reserve stress level that they can take on so much stress. Can you talk to me about how true that is for you?
Yeah, I mean, um, there's it can be very stressful, like to the point where there were times when I couldn't digest food. I passed out at a restaurant, thought I had an anxiety attack and knocked a table over, woke up in a hospital. Like it's can be really hard. You really have to push yourself because sometimes you're traveling, you're not sleeping, you're going into really intense meetings, you've got a lot on the line. It can really take its toll on you physically and mentally. For me, I would always just calm myself down by saying, what's the worst that could happen? If the company goes under, you've taken it pretty far. You've raised a bunch of money. You've given a bunch of people jobs. And if there's a real reason why the company doesn't deserve to exist, then it'll fail. But you've got great experiences and you'll be able to go get another job pretty easily because of those experiences. And so that's kind of what the pep talk you'd give yourself. And then you're like, okay, so now you're kind of viewing that you're playing with house's money a little bit. And you say, well, maybe I can pull this off after all, actually. And you turn it more like a game, like, fine, it deserves to fail, but it doesn't mean I can't give it one more shot. You never know. That Hail Mary pass might work out. And yeah, just try to, like you mentioned at the onset, I'm living in a good country. I've got my health. My family loves me, all those sorts of things. And so be appreciative of that. No, it's not the end of the world if a business fails, and that you'll land on your feet anyway. So you just try to keep that perspective. And then the stress, is at least somewhat contained and puts in a box, because otherwise it can just overwhelm you. And now you're not sleeping. And then just compounds itself.
Mm-hmm. Alex Hermosi, you're probably familiar with him. He mentioned that. So the funny thing about him is he lost everything twice, not once. So he said that his mentality with it was either he'd keep doing a job that he didn't like, that he kind of reached where he wanted to reach. The goal's done. There's no faraway objective. There's no reason for him to continue essentially. Or he could just take the risk, start the business, move out of his house, put it all in on one line, and worst case scenario, it fails, he just goes back to the same job. Whereas if he didn't do anything, just go 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the line, and he would have just said, what if, right? What if it worked out? What if I just tried one more shot? And it's very deep, your journey, and I appreciate you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Can you talk to me about this might be a little bit of a touch point, some of the challenges that you had to go through?
Well, I mean, there's just so many. We were testing a system off in Lake Ontario, and we sunk this multi-million-dollar structure we'd built, and it was the last money we had. But it turns out we had this all risk insurance policy. We called them and they sure enough said, fine, we'll send you $4 million and you can try again. I had to mortgage my house probably 3 or 4 times to make payroll and get us through tough spots. When COVID hit, we were locked out of Australia, but we had already signed a $1 billion contract to advance this plant. And now we couldn't get into the country. So we had to like team up with people within the country. We had times where I made some bad hires and they were steering the company in the wrong direction and the culture was really tanking and having to like totally, I think I had to let go half of my leadership team at one point, do essentially all those jobs while I hired the backfill and try to stop the business from failing kind of in the meantime. So, and then the personal struggles I mentioned, the health challenges and things that you put yourself through. So, yeah, there's been no shortage of challenges along the way. We've almost run out of money a lot of times. We've lost contracts we thought we should have won. We've had people try to steal our idea and our intellectual property. We've been sued for, nefarious reasons. Yeah, there's been a lot of challenges, but having a good team to work through, good investors. I mean, I view my investors more as family, as friends, as people I'm really grateful for. And when things get rough, it's never I'm afraid to tell them. It's I have to tell them, and then we're going to solve this together. And so having an investor base that's so supportive and you feel is in it with you goes a long way. So it's definitely not easy, but with the right team, you can get there and the right perspective.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the good things or the fun stuff now. With all those challenges in mind, how did it feel when you would secure those $1 billion contracts and you raised all this money? How did all the success feel?
It's really strange. It's very anticlimactic, actually. I remember talking to some of my team, and they're like, when we close this financing, let's just drive to the airport. We're going to hop on the next flight to someplace sunny and just party for a weekend and come back. But these deals, they take a long time to come into fruition. Like when Goldman Sachs first invested, I think it was an 18-month due diligence process where you're getting your personality profile vetted and it just keeps it drags out and drags out and drags out. And then you finally close and then the money comes in. And it's just like, finally, we're done with that, So that you would think the highs are much higher, but they don't. It's more every once in a while. It's more spontaneous that you're just sitting out having some beers with a couple of your executives that you work with, and you get some good news on your phone, and you realize it's Friday afternoon, and so then you just start ordering more drinks and celebrating and talking about all the crap you've been through as a team and all that sort of thing. And those are really the moments where you stop and you really are appreciative of the journey. But, one story I tell sometimes is when we first closed the Goldman Sachs and the Canadian Pension Plan invested $250 million. And the documents came through and the money came through on Christmas Eve
I
on
see.
2021.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my son was little at the time. I put him to bed and I grabbed a case of beer. I went in my basement and I drank the whole case myself, just thinking about what we'd gone through. And then sure enough, Christmas morning came very early because my wife shows this picture where my son is like opening all these gifts and my eyes are just bloodshot, my face swollen, but my smile was ear to ear. And so that was a very hungover Christmas, that one, and one I'll never forget. But and it's same thing with the contracts. you get shortlisted, then they threaten to pull it, and then you're negotiating on price, then the lawyers come in, and 4 months later, you finally sign the contract. But again, it's kind of anticlimactic at that point. You just wanted it done, and you feel like if it went away, you're actually taking a step backwards instead of just getting something. So, but the negative ones come, like those are pointed. You got to deal with them at the moment. The positive ones, yeah, like you say, they tend to drag out and be a bit anticlimactic at the end of the day.
It's very interesting because Alex, just like I was mentioning earlier on, he says that everyone views entrepreneurship with the lens that, okay, you've got like super low lows and super high highs. But what they don't realize that it's a long process, just mundane, doing the same thing over and over and over again. And then you get shitted on, and then you just do it again and again and again,
Yeah.
and then shit on again. And then finally you get the highs.
Yeah, and then the highs drag out, so they're not even really that high. And then, but it's, and I've a couple of entrepreneurs that I know that have sold their businesses, and again, you would think but a lot of them actually get depressed afterwards because they don't have the pace, the feel of the community, the impact they're having, and now they're just sitting on money, and so they go on a couple of trips, and then they're depressed, and they don't know what to do next, and so you should enjoy the journey, because there's no guarantee that when the journey's done, it's actually better on the other side. Like the journey is life, so. Yeah, and that's why if you have a good team, again, it makes all the world, having a good team that you're happy to show up in the office and, work through these challenges with, be in that foxhole together. That's what it's all about. That's where the memories come from, and what you're most proud of at the end of the day.
I love the journey. I resonate a lot with what you're saying just because sometimes in hindsight, it's, you might think something's really bad for you, but it turns out it's really good. And I'll give you a personal example. Grade 9 till grade 12, so 4 years of high school, I was completely engineered. Physics and chemistry, I took every single year. I was horrible at the two, but I still took them, right? My mom wanted me to be an engineer. I was down for it, but I was just down for it just because, okay, yeah, I'll make money, right? So when as a plan C, not even a plan B, I applied to two business schools, so Rotman and Schulich. I applied to those two, and I get rejected from Rotman, so I have Schulich on the line, and I get rejected from my top three engineering schools: U of T, Mac, and Waterloo. So now I'm sitting there. Okay, do I go to, a not so good engineering school, or do I just put it all in, go to business, my plan C, and go to a pretty nice school? And I tell you, I promise, I'm not even exaggerating. I opened up my laptop, I pressed accept for engineering because I was like, screw this. Business is for dumb people. So I pressed accept and it didn't go through. So I reloaded the page. My dad walks in the room. He's like, yo, think about it one more time. Just go to sleep on it. I wake up the next morning, I select Schulich. And yeah, I'm so glad I didn't pick engineering. My friends are telling me how the exams are. Oh my God. Like I prefer having the time to do things like this. I prefer networking, talking, being a doctor for businesses. That's super cool. And yeah.
Fate.
hmm You mentioned earlier about your co-founder, right? And choosing a co-founder is very, very important. They're, you guys are almost like one entity, and you guys, you know, are pulling the strings on different aspects. Can you talk to me about how you found your co-founder?
So Cam Lewis is the guy's name. He's a brilliant, creative guy. He'd been a serial entrepreneur. He'd started a few different businesses, and he was the guy with the idea. So I was at Bruce Power, and I had a problem there. I was trying to solve for Bruce Power, and he had this idea for a business, but didn't really know the sector very well. And so we met. It was clear to me that the business wasn't anywhere where I could buy it at Bruce Power and put it to work.
Mm-hmm.
But I liked him and I liked the idea. And then when I decided that I wanted to make the plunge, so I got to know him over 6 months. And then I said, look, I'm willing to quit my job and do this. And, he's now retired. He's left Hydrostor, sold some shares, moved down to Brazil. He runs some charities down there, and he's got
That's
some
sweet.
side businesses, and he's living life on the beach in Brazil. He was up here last week, had a beer with him, and so we still stay close in touch, but he's not intimately involved in the business anymore. So yeah, one thing that I would say about Cam, his relentless positivity and creativity to work around solutions, to never get beat up, was really inspiring, frankly. And he did something smart in the early days. Is he said he's the creative guy. He's not the business guy, and he thinks there should be one leader of a business. I know a lot of companies that have co-founders, and they say we both report to the board. But the problem is when there ultimately is a disagreement, who wins? And I've seen multiple occasions where that's led to the failure of the business. Cam, from day one, he said, you be the CEO, I'll report to you, and then let's start this business under that structure. And it allowed us to avoid fights. I knew that when it was, if we disagreed on a path, that I could overrule him, and we would go down that path. And he never held it against me. And so we've had a great relationship the entire time. And I feel really blessed that I met Cam and was able to have such a great partner to start the business.
Cam seems like a super sick guy. Maybe I should go to Brazil sometime and just do a podcast with him.
There you go. He would love to do that.
But a bit of a personal question. What do you think Cam saw in you in the 6 months that you guys were together?
I think what he was looking for was a professional business guy, like
I see.
someone with credibility, with a bit of a reputation. He knew you'd have to raise a lot of money. And so my background, being an MBA, being an engineer, working at Deloitte for all those years, now being at a electric generating company, and just the way that I guess carried myself and was able to talk about, well, if we're going to do this, here's the steps, here's the plan we got to go through. It means we got to raise money, we got to put a board of directors together, we got to do a bunch of these things. And he knew he could solve the technical problems with his creativity, but he needed more of a business person and someone with a bit of that polish that could go and raise money and that sort of thing. So, and then we just hit it off. He was from a small town in northern Alberta. I was from a small town in northern Ontario. We had a lot of the same values. We like to have fun. So we just kind of hit it off. And that having that personal rapport obviously helps, because we spent a lot of time together, sharing hotel rooms when we had no money, driving on long road trips to try to convince investors or partners to do work with us. So we look back and we kind of laugh at some of the things that we've had to go through over the years. But he's a great guy and great person to start a business with.
What would you say is the most fond memory you have of you and Cam?
Oh, we did this, the island of Aruba. We were going to do a project there. And when we went to a signing ceremony there with a few members of our team, we had a pretty blowout party at Aruba that I remember was a lot of fun. And then some of the just dumb business decisions that we made over the years that we laugh about. Sinking of those things in Lake Ontario was another big one. So yeah, there's a lot of different memories. One thing, when we were building our pilot plant, he would get interns to go bury crystals under the four corners of the plant, because the first few times it didn't work and things went wrong. So then he went and got these crystals at interns, and then sure enough, it worked. So now every new office we move into, he comes into town with crystals and puts them in the four corners. So he keeps things light in the office. So a lot of fun to be around.
I mean, it is, especially when times get tough. You need to have like that one buddy who's always making you smile, right?
Exactly.
I remember. It's really funny. We went fishing. Obviously, it's nowhere near as massive of a story as what you said, but we went fishing, me and my friends. First time we ever went fishing, none of us knew how to fish. We bought one random rod from Canadian Tire. We had no idea what a bait was even. So we drove like an hour away to a random place to fish. It took us 2 months to plan it out, right? And we finally get there. We don't know how to tie the string to the rod, so we have to ask a random guy. It takes us another 45 minutes to do it. Some of us, I don't know, they wanted to hunt and they acted like it was hunting. So they pretended to do that. And since now we were on the discussion, who's gonna cast the first rod? So one of my friends, we just allowed him because why not? And he cast the rod. The spool just falls in the water. And I scream. I get so angry. And I was just like, yo, but it's fallen into the water. Go get it. He's like, no, I think there's parasites. So we start arguing for another 5 minutes. Like, yo, you jump in. He's like, no, I jump in because I'm smaller than him, which makes no sense, right? And yeah, but it's memories like those. Like you look back at the time, I was so angry because the only thing we had were these frozen burgers that we got from No Frills. That was the best. That was the best part of the trip. You had to pay for gas. It was time, the effort. When I went back home, my dad asked me like, "How many fishes did you catch?" I had to tell him no, zero. But yeah, I love my friends and the journey, like all those things. It's really really fun.
Absolutely. That's good.
Talk to me about how your background in industrial engineering and also, by the way, that's remember how I mentioned I got rejected from UFT? Industrial engineering was my first pick because I wanted to be in the business of engineering. So talk to me about how that helped you.
Yeah, I mean, I was never probably going to be a practicing engineer where, you're mostly doing calculations and stuff. I like math. I like understanding how things work. So industrial was a best fit for me. And the program was really neat. They'd give you like boxes of supplies and you'd have to make something that could pass this obstacle course
I
and stuff
see.
like that. And so it was a lot more practical, hands-on, a lot more business. You could understand it versus like chemistry and molecules and stuff like that. So it was a good fit. And it was, I was doing varsity hockey at the time. So, it probably was the least amount of hours for an engineering program. It was still a lot, but I was at the rink, 3, 4 hours a day. So you try to have a social life, do engineering, do hockey. Would have been pretty tough to take one of the more intensive engineering programs. So it was a good balance and allowed seamlessly to move into the business side, the MBA afterwards. And a lot of the stuff you learned is quite applicable way of thinking and solving problems. So it was good. I was happy with the choice I made for undergrad for sure.
hmm Would you say the discipline of you balancing both hockey and industrial engineering helped you out throughout life?
Yeah, I think, earlier to our conversation about just putting yourself out there, I did that growing up. I was always on multiple sports teams, doing socials, throwing parties, volunteering for stuff. And so then coming down here, you get used to a pace and being able to operate at a where there's always stuff on the go. You're always balancing different things and you become more productive. And that kind of just followed me down to Toronto through those initial undergrad years. Then you get in consulting, it's high pace, you're always on the road, you're learning a lot. And then you get into entrepreneurship and then you do that. And so it's kind of my life has just been a microcosm of always, working hard, lots going on, lots of competing priorities, and not a lot of downtime. But
Would you say you prefer that?
yeah, every once in a while you get burnt out, but you frankly you rest for 2 or 3 days straight, and
Yeah.
then you're bored again. And so it's just the
Yeah.
way I'm wired. I can't just sit and do nothing. So and once you realize that about yourself, you start realizing I'm not really burnt out. I just need a night off and blow off some steam and then get back at it the next day.
hmm How would you say the MBA helped you? Because you mentioned that it's a combined program, so you could accelerate through that. Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, and MBA's, it's good. Coming from a business or an engineering background, it give you a little bit broader business concepts, a lot of great relationships. a network that you build. But it's really about just getting that first job out of your MBA. That's kind of what it was all about. And I managed to get the consulting job that I wanted. So that was a success. I still hang out with some of the guys from my business school.
Oh, that's awesome.
But yeah, no, it was good. It was much more, it's about the social, the network you build, the relationships, going to networking receptions, learning about different businesses, that sort of thing. That was teamwork, collaboration. The actual academia side wasn't very hard. It's more about you as an executive and how can you build teams and politics in office environments and in business school. So it's much more about, growing up and being an executive. You learn a lot of those softer skills that go into that.
Something I'm very interested about, how do you maintain the culture at Hydrostor even though it's growing so rapidly?
It's tricky, but we have our culture code defined. So we have 4 values. We have a sheet on each saying, like, this is what the value means. Here's what it doesn't look like. Here's what it should look like. I give a company talk every month. I go through the values. We highlight and emphasize examples that are living it. Then we do mini retreats where we'll bring 30 or 40 people from the company together. Values and what we mean by them, is focused there. I have my executive team do a retreat. We talk about values. I encourage all them to do stuff with their smaller teams. So you just got to constantly reinforce it. But it is really important that you do, because once the leadership, lives the values day to day and shows that they're important, everybody else starts stepping up. And I have a lot of people come to me and say, when we deal with Hydrostor, you guys look and feel different than a lot of companies we talk to. And, when I mention the values that we have, they're like, yeah, we see that stuff coming through. Being authentic, being a very transparent and trustworthy, united team. It's all these sorts of things that we've worked really hard to bake into the fabric of everyone. And when we interview, it is a screen that we use. Will they fit in with our culture? And do they carry our values that we hold dear? And it does get hard, but we're at a point now where it almost feels like you're rolling downhill a little bit on the culture team. We've got such a critical mass, and everyone knows what it looks like. So now they're naturally able to hire more people that would fit in. And you see how well the team's performing. It actually makes my job easier. So when it really always wasn't that way, there was times when our culture was not where I wanted to be, and it required a lot of work to kind of get it back on track.
That's true. Can you talk to me about, interesting topic, but bad hires? How was your experience finding out that leadership?
Yeah, it's really tough because you put a lot of effort into hiring, and then you tell your board, I hired a great person and I want to pay them more than what we expected. And then they not working out. It takes a while for you to come to the realization. And then you also realize how disruptive it's going to be to let them go and how expensive. And now you got to go through another hiring process, and you're questioning your own judgment now. Do I even know what right looks like? But you got to move on as quick as you can, because they will sink your company. It doesn't take many bad apples to poison a corporate culture and to steer. And, 1 or 2 bad decisions can bury the company. And when you have someone come in that refuses to share information and, doesn't lean on the teammates to make a collective decision, but goes renegade and starts doing their own thing, they can sink the business pretty quickly. So you have to act, and it's tough. No one likes firing people, but I think the more experience you get, every time you do it, you realize how much better off you are. Like, if you're even thinking about it, you probably should just do it. And then no doubt a couple of months later, you're going to be like, that's the best decision I've ever made. And once you've seen that pattern play out a bunch of times, you're not afraid of it anymore. So the minute you start realizing someone's a bad hire, you want to go let them go. It's better for them. It's better for the company. It's better for everything. And you just move on and live with it. So, but it's, again, I've grown so much at Hydrostor. That's one area. I didn't like conflict. I like to avoid conflict.
Mhm.
And I just tried to make do with people that I liked. And I really realized that the quality of the team you hire really is going to dictate whether your business is a success or not. And so I had to not hire friends, but hire people with really high competency, but also a good cultural fit. And it's got to be both. If you just hire friends, you're hiring for a good fit. But if they don't bring the skills needed, you're not going to be able to outpace the competition. And if you just bring in really smart people, but they're not a good cultural fit, it's going to lead to a toxic culture. So you really got to make sure it's both, and don't pull the trigger until you're convinced it's both.
Mhm. There's definitely going to be people who are trying to apply to Hydrostor, watching this podcast, trying to learn a little bit about you. What advice would you give them before pressing the apply button?
You know, um, first the sales pitch. I guess Hydrostor, I think, is a great place to work because we're on a mission that everyone understands. Right, we're trying to save the world from the worst impacts of climate change. We're a private company that's small, which means you can have a big impact, and we can give equity. We give everyone some ownership in the
Oh, everyone
business.
has equity.
Everybody in the business gets a slice of the business. And so it's a great environment, great culture where we're doing great things. And it's global. So you're talking about Europe, but then you're down in Australia, and you've got a great perspective to see the world. It's hard, it's challenging what we're doing, but I think people want that from a career. Um, so if people are thinking of applying, I would use your network to try to meet someone that works at Hydrostor. Is probably the best way to do it, as opposed to just a random submit an application. Obviously, when there's postings, we are collecting applications, but it's probably even better for you to use your network, use LinkedIn, try to find someone that can introduce you to someone and pop in for a coffee or have a quick Zoom, get to know them a bit, learn about the roles that might be available. And then, we have a referral program where people refer people.
Bonus.
They get a
I see.
bonus and stuff. So, and we take those referrals quite seriously. So, but yeah, and we're always growing. We're doubling our head count, it seems, every 12 months. So there's no shortage of opportunities, um, either in our head office, which is Toronto, Denver, or Melbourne, Australia. Those are our main three offices
That's
now.
awesome. I love asking this question because it always gets the person thinking. Are there any questions I didn't ask you that you think I should have?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of ground from the personal side to the business side. Um, no, I think we covered a lot of good ground.
Sure. I'm glad. I'm very glad. And now this one sometimes gets people stumped, but if you had a time machine, you could go back 15, 20, 30 years back. What advice would you give yourself?
I would just encourage myself to have more self confidence. I think in the early days, because I grew up in a small town and I wasn't, my parents weren't executives and stuff
Yeah.
like that. I kind of felt like I was always the odd man out, and that I had to prove, and I carried a lot of burden with me for no reason really in those early years. So I probably, but maybe I needed to do that to have the hunger to ultimately, push harder when opportunities came later. So I don't know. I'm not one to go and want to replay things too much. I think life unfolds the way it should, and as long as you're a good person and you treat people the right way, it'll come back around. And you only live once, so put yourself out there. You'll fail, but if you fail, you learn, or you succeed. Just keep moving and do it with a positive attitude, and do it while treating people the right way. And ultimately, if you do that, I think you'll be a success no matter what. And you can't go back and relitigate. If I would have done this, I would have done that. That's just the way life the cookie crumbles.
That's true. And Curtis, I think we've covered everything. Not everything, but a lot of things. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really do
Excellent.
appreciate
Really
it.
enjoyed the conversation, Mark.
I
Thank you
did
so
too.
much for
I
having
did
me.
too. Thank you so much. And viewers at KKC Consulting, please tune in for next time. And again, I'm not going to stop saying this. Please subscribe to the channel and give it a thumbs up as well. Thank you so much.